Sam Bankman-Fried, I'm not going to beat this to death, and this isn't going to be the only thing we talk about, but Sam Bankman-Fried was scheduled to testify for the House Services Financial Committee or something like that this morning at 10 a.m. A lot of people were questioning, how is this guy still just like, he's doing every podcast. I mean, if my mom had a podcast, this guy would have joined. It didn't matter.
Really true? Did he really tell Congress he was too busy? Is that true?
He said something like, no, there's two.
I mean, I really didn't know if it was just like, fake news
it was something like that. He said he had
around.
a very busy schedule. He said something to that effect. But there's two. The House testimony, I guess he was going to give today. The Senate, which I believe is tomorrow, he declined, which apparently they had an issue with, and I understand. Can you help me understand, Tom, why just 16, 17 hours before he's scheduled to give this testimony that he is, he's arrested. He's arrested in the Bahamas. We're not going to get to hear his testimony under oath. And to add insult to injury, the SEC out of nowhere this morning files their complaint as well. Apparently they have this huge, massive investigation, and they slap down this complaint that says FTX was a fraud from the beginning. And I'm just curious, doesn't that seem a little suspect to you, Tony? We're just getting ready to get this man under oath testifying, and all of a sudden we can't hear from him. Doesn't that seem a little suspect to you, Tom?
I don't even understand you.
You're not listening.
I listened.
I don't think you've looked at the screen at one time.
No, I listened. I don't get you. If you have somebody, I'll tell you why. Because if you have somebody that is a complete fraud, okay, and I do believe that he's been a fraud from the start. Like incompetent, whatever you want to say, but everything. It wasn't so much. Maybe it wasn't fraud from day one, but it was.
No, they're saying it was now. That's
incompetence
their whole thing.
On top of ego. His ego was too huge. The incompetence on top of that, and then shortly thereafter, everything turned into fraud. Why would you give that person the podium for 1 second to talk? Like, bothered me that Congress, that some committee was even willing to listen to him. And the other thing is, if you're already a fraudster, like, why would you believe anything he has to say to start with? Like, why do you say you want to hear what he has to say? I don't care what he has to say. I want him talking to the walls in a prison cell and just let him talk to himself for the next 15 years. Like, I don't even get why you'd want to hear one thing he has to say. I don't care what he has to say. That's like saying, that's like, do you really want to hear from the Bernie Madoffs of the world? Did you really want to hear Elizabeth Holmes explain everything? I didn't. I don't want to hear any of that. Like, it's just like, listen, dude, you had your 15 minutes. In this case, he had his 2 years. He stole people's money. He just unlimited spent anything he wanted to do. He was on top of the world for 2 straight years. He was one of the most obnoxious people in the sense that, not only was his ego off the charts, but I mean, he couldn't even, a buddy of mine was on a call with him because there was a lot of people on the call, and he told me, there was like 8 or 10 people on the call. And he said he played video games, never looked up at the screen once on the call. And I'm like, that's just kind of disgusting. It bothers me. So to answer your question, no. The timing, first of all, the timing of what the SEC does, and I've learned this because of lots of things we've had to do with the SEC over the years, between the SEC and different regulators, they are not going to do anything. They're not going to change their plans of whatever whatever they're trying to do with this guy because of some, congressional hearing. So, they may have been worried this guy was going to take off and, try to split or whatever. They needed to get him locked up. I think it was just a question of working with the Bahamian authorities to figure out, how do we get him? How do we make this clean? How do we ship him back here? And all that. So it just happened to be the time. But I would have never let him talk. I thought it was disgusting that he had a chance to talk.
You're not even talking from a lawyer point of view. You're just saying giving him the platform at all.
I don't want to hear him.
Right.
He's a liar. I mean, why do you want to hear? Why do you want to hear anything he has to say? He lied about everything.
Sure. Yeah.
It's. I don't disagree with you at all, but I think my point was, and I'm only saying this tongue in cheek, Tom. The point was all the political donations he splashed across D.C. would have made it interesting to watch.
You're completely. First of all, he contributed to everybody, both parties and everything like that. But that's irrelevant. Political donations.
Irrelevant.
I'll tell you why it's irrelevant, because politicians are and political donations. It is very rare that politicians they don't once they get the money, they don't even know who you are. Like
in this case, that might not. It could be subject to clawbacks. In this case, that's why I think it's interesting.
Well, it's subject. What could be subject to clawbacks in this case is because he stole the money.
Agreed.
But I wouldn't give most politicians, I mean, they're very happy to take your check and then they forget who you are. I can promise you that. Like, 1 minute you give them a check, the next minute they're like, hey, yeah, what was your name again? Like, I mean, it's amazing. The uncanny ability for politics. I don't care whether it's, $2,500 or $25,000 or $2.5 million. They'll forget who you are within 12 seconds. So I don't think that's the case. As far as clawbacks go, yeah, I think that, obviously everything that he stole money to buy, whether it's condos, whether it's political donations, whether it's,
I don't know, Victor, I'm getting a lot of emails with support with the way that you're speaking as opposed to the way that Tom's speaking.
Oh, please, give me a break. I'm just
letting you know.
Tell your
you
monkeys.
got some support.
I agree with you. I think at some level, when the evidence all points to, I think that this guy is doing whatever he can with any platform he can get his hands on to try to paint the picture of negligence over fraud. He's trying to move public opinion toward that direction. I think a weird thing, if I were to arrest, let's say I got you and Tony, right? I caught you guys, you broke into my house and I want to know what happened. What's my strategy? I separate you, interrogate you, and I use any discrepancies in your story to try to bring you down. Hopefully I've got one weak link here that's going to rat on the others, given enough discrepancies. The weird thing I think about what he was also doing, nobody talked about, is like, he's allowing all the perps to get their story straight, to align on the story. Now, whether Caroline and whether
they're all she flipped on him a long time ago.
He has.
You know that. I mean, she's walking around New York right now.
Chicken wing dinner, the coffee. I'll take it all. Give you a piece of paper.
She's going to get 3 to 5 years, and I think you're right, Tom. He's going to get 10 to 20. I hope
he's going to get 10 to 20. She's going to get. You're right, 3 to 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
And every single person in that house, in that were every single executive there, is going to turn on him to save their butts. They have to, and they are all incompetent. They're all going to end up barred from for life. They're all going to be felons. Yeah. They're all going to accept some kind of plea deal. They're all going to be barred for life from anything to do with securities business or anything forever. And you know what? Good riddance to all of them. This is going to change. This is for the first, like everybody's talking about, hey, this is the beginning of the end of crypto, or this is the end of, decentralization, all this kind of stuff. I think it's the exact opposite. Like, I'm more inclined to invest in the space today than we have been for the last couple of years, because I'm convinced that this is going to be
the snakes out of the grass.
This is the cleanup.
One blade of grass to hide behind the Sahara
This is
Desert.
the cleanup print. This is the cleanup print. Yeah. This is going to change everything.
2 quick points on that before we move on to the next subject. One, Bernie Madoff operated inside of a regulated entity. I think we forget, if you're a bad actor, there are ways. If you're a bad actor, if you're going to rob somebody, you're going to hold up a gun, all the laws in the world and all the police officers are not necessarily going to prevent you from taking that bad action. Bernie Madoff operated in a regulated space and pulled off a $65 billion. In reality, maybe it's 18 to 19 billion of real money. Fraud. You've got this case taking place outside of a regulated space, but I just think there's this knee-jerk reaction to say this unregulated space, this is the problem, and it's the actors. It's the actors who are willing to do the bad thing. That's one.
Except it is hard. It would be very hard to, Bernie Madoff was a kind of a special case because his world was a world that's not actively audited. Like the private advisory business, he was able to separate that from his kind of regulated BD. So his private advisory business nobody really looked at that because it was all just, big accredited investors, a few institutions, whatever it was. But it wasn't something that gets looked at that closely.
Well, I think you're right. The other thing here is to take this as a knock on the decentralized world. To me, it's the opposite of what happened. Like, I look at FTX and I'm thinking, like, this is the opposite of decentralized. This is literally ultra centralization. If you could start a firm where you were the broker, the exchange, the market makers and liquidity providers, and also the hedge funds running statistical arb all in the same place. That doesn't exist in traditional finance.
Of course.
And that place is supposed to be centralized. So this was like ultra centralization versus a good example.
But
of
you
a
understood. You
decentralized platform.
understand that was out of necessity. There isn't.
Of course.
There was no other way to operate that business. So in the sense that if they were done right, they were groundbreaking, but they weren't done right. But there was no other way to do it. Now, that's what I talked about this morning, Vic. Now, the entire world's going to move. The entire world of decentralized market making is going to move onto. It'll be on an exchange, on exchanges. Most of them will be Chicago based. I think there'll be 4 or 5 competing exchanges for high frequency market making on decentralized assets. They're all going to open within the next year, and none of those. Some will be centrally cleared. Some of those will be privately cleared, and they will be. And they'll be market makers, there'll be clearing firms, there'll be separate custodians, and then there'll be front-end brokers. So the system will be back to normal.
That was the whole point of this thing: transparency and disintermediation. And somehow this experiment went entirely the opposite direction.